A big topic. It's a boring one, but it is a very painful one. Is tax reporting. We actually have
Hmm.
chains partners we work with that 2-3 years ago were worth billions of dollars, and the data is gone, and they have to report their taxes. And they're sitting there and they're coming to us and be like, "Hey, Kyve team, so we need to file our taxes, but we don't have the data. Can you please find us a way that we can get our data back?"
Hey, everybody, welcome back to What Kind of Internet Do You Want? This is our podcast series, and we are interviewing Fabian from Kyve Network today. Fabian, I'm so glad to have you with us today. Thanks for making the time.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So before we really get into, your network, let's just talk about, who you are and how you got into Web3.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Fabian. I'm from Germany. I'm a software developer actually originally. Started out in this space in like 2019. Always fascinated from like all the data stuff that has been going on. Actually, it was part of a hackathon that got me into crypto, together with some like crazy people I met on that hackathon and stuff. It's a whole story, but it's really cool. Very organic in that sense. And yeah, then I don't know, never really got out of it. The whole Kai thing became a thing, but I guess we're gonna hear something about that later too. And so yeah, that's me.
So you were like, you would say like a Web2 software developer before you got into Web3?
Yeah, exactly. I was working for an edtech startup basically,
Oh.
and was always kind of like close with people from the SAP, this like big German like software company. And then one day they invited me to join a hackathon, and I was like, cool, I would love to. It wasn't crypto related; it was just a hackathon. And then the one guy on the left of me, he was working for the SAP on like the thing. It's called a CLA assistant. It's like if you have foreign developers building for your application, they want you to digitally sign like a contributor license agreement CLA that you are giving away your rights on the code. You can sue the company later, basically. And I found that was very interesting because they had big clients, but they were actually was a master's project, like a thesis from some person, and so they were storing all those signatures from like all those important companies on like a hard drive on the fridge in the office, which was like
Mm-hmm. High
strange to me.
security. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that they did it. I mean, it was a project to be fair, right? It wasn't like a full
Right.
fledged
Totally.
SAP
Yeah.
product, but yeah. And then the guy on the right, he's an absolute crazy guy sitting on the right of me, and he was into crypto, right? And he was like,
Mm-hmm.
Fabian, let's do a cryptocurrency. And I was like, okay, I like never heard of that before, nothing like that. And it was a 3-day hackathon, and even back then, like creating an ERC20 token on like Ethereum took like an hour. And we
Mm-hmm.
were like, okay, cool. Now we have like a cryptocurrency. It has like zero value. DEXs weren't a thing back then and stuff like that. And so I was like, well, nice. Like, what is the value now? Okay, we've done it. And so I don't know, never really got hooked by that. But then back at the hotel on the first day, I was thinking, oh, actually, storing the signatures from the contributor license agreement on the blockchain, for me, that makes a lot of sense because you want them to be immutable, right? You want them to
Mm-hmm.
be transparent because it was an open source repository, anyways. So why not take the signatures basically? Why not combine those two ideas, right? And have the developers sign like a thing and we post it to the blockchain. And then this was my contribution to the hackathon. And then like a little like half a year later or something like that, the one crypto guy from SAP called me and was like, "Hey Fabian, I found this super cool blockchain. It's called Arweave. You can like store any kind of data there. That could be a cool idea for a decentralized DocuSign." I was like, "Oh, actually, that's right." And so this is then how I became more and more basically into the crypto space, and then also like how Kyve over the time became a thing, basically.
Fascinating. I love hearing people's origin stories and kind of like what your hook into Web3 was because there's so many different paths to find your way in. There's kind of like the financial technology side of things, which is where a lot of people, you know, uh, find their way in. But yours is definitely more on the what I would say like the Web3 side, just like the infrastructure side of how the web works, how we use the web, how we interact with it, and the kinds of tools and services that it provides to us. So now that you have been in the space for a while and you're probably familiar with a lot of different projects, what is your sort of like high level vision? So like if we get it right and we actually do succeed in onboarding all of the people that are on Web 2 to Web 3, what does it look like? How is it different than the web we have today? What's
Yeah.
better? Yeah.
I actually would hope that it wouldn't look much different than what it looks like now, right? I think this is also something the space is struggling right now with. It's like the space is really proud of the underlying technology and how it works, but it's way too complicated for like a non-tech user to use that, right? Like my favorite example is always like Uber. I don't really care what Uber is doing to get me a ride within 5 minutes, right? Like all I care about is that I get my ride within 5 minutes, but I don't care if they use a queuing system, a database, and all that stuff around it. But crypto always likes to make a big deal around the technology, right? I think what really matters is like the technology that we have, where even now with AI coming up, I actually see blockchain as a technology even fitting more because for me it's the perfect counterpart to AI, right? Where we get to a point where we might see only custom generated content, right? Like maybe a custom generated ad based on my data profile that I have, right? That there's no marketing person creating one ad as a campaign and showing it to hundreds of people, but maybe all of those people getting their own app. So like more of those generative content. Then we don't know suddenly what content is synthetic and what content is real. And then for me, blockchain is exactly that, fits that gap perfectly, where it's like, well, everything on the blockchain cannot be created synthetically, needs to be created by a person, right? We know the true origin of it, we know where it's coming from. And so actually, I hope that in the future, like the web will be a mix of those two things, that we do basically see like the AI space evolving in this very exciting way, and then blockchain basically being really this foundation layer to the web, like your source of truth for the web, right? Kind of like coming from that angle, but with the complexity around the technology also abstracted away, so that like the everyday non-tech user doesn't have to deal with all the complex technical interactions. Like even for me, being in a space now for a couple of years, 8 hours a day, if not even more sometimes, the moment I switch away from like the Kyve stuff to like other ecosystems, I'm like, what the is this, right? Like it's like super complicated to use, and I'm like, well, if I'm already struggling with this, how is someone else ever going to do it, kind of thing. So I think this is like what we really need to work on, is like abstracting that away, but also having this foundational layer where everything roots on, so to say. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and I absolutely agree that, one of the things that Web3 needs to succeed is the ease of use of Web2, right? Like Web 1 was, arguably decentralized and much more free, but also very hard to use. You needed a ton of special skills in order to kind of post anything to it. Whereas Web 2 became, as we all know, this place for user generated content. That's what really kind of like took off and made Web 2 Web 2. And part of what made that possible was the WYSIWYG interaction, right? What you see is what you get. Like you can easily spin up a website, not be a graphic designer, but use a design that has already been made by a graphic designer. You can easily like change the colors, change the fonts, change all of that kind of stuff. You can easily post videos. Like um, my husband was putting videos online like before YouTube, right? So he had to like learn about how to um, compress the video, how to transcode the video, how to do all of these different things so that you could even watch it because it was a very complicated process before YouTube just put all of that, let's say, under the hood and just made it like really easy for the end user. And we are for sure lacking that in Web3 right now. I completely agree. I want to kind of dig into what you said though about Web3 being this source of truth. That I think that one of the things that people often sort of confuse or maybe just don't articulate as clearly as they mean to is that if something's in the blockchain, it is true. That's not really it, right? It's more just like if something's in the blockchain, it can't be changed. And you might have some additional information about its source, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And that's actually kind of a good bridge into the Kyve network and to kind of like learn about your work there. So, can you just kind of give us an overview of your project, how it works, and then we'll talk more about that truth issue?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think actually this, as you said, is a perfect bridge into that topic, because so what we do with Kyve or how it got started mainly was like, hey, can you archive blockchain data from one blockchain onto another blockchain? That's why Kyve from archiving. And this is what started. This was actually me being like contracted through a bounty from the Polkadot team to store data from Polkadot on Arweave, right? And I was like, sure, I can do that, no worries. But if my code has a bug or actually produces any problems, then we store wrong data forever. And this is exactly what you said, this like crucial thing with like this source of truth. It doesn't mean it's the real truth, but like we have something that cannot be tampered with. And then the idea was like, hey, can we find a way to decentralize this data archiving process, and especially also making it trustless? Because the other angle is, hey, I could also maliciously now modify the archive so that if basically someone ever needs to read the archive, they would read wrong data, which would also make the archive useless. So we needed a decentralized, trustless system to achieve that task. And also, this is then actually the reason why we said, hey, we need to build our own blockchain network for this. There were other decisions, technical decisions, why we became our own network. But this was then we were set on, hey, we need to actually use the blockchain technology for this in a sense, right? And then this question, well, what is true and what isn't, is exactly then also a hard part, because as you said, like it's not the truth that is stored on the blockchain, but it is the source that we can validate. And so for us, what we do when we store and archive another blockchain is we only check, did this actually happen on the blockchain, yes or no? It could be that the blockchain itself has made a mistake that we wouldn't catch with Kyve, but we just check if the data that we receive is correct. And there's also something that people think don't quite understand sometimes. It's also very tricky because everything we write to a blockchain, that cannot be tampered with. That's for sure correct. But actually, what we never check is if what we read when I request the blockchain, hey, please tell me what happened on that block, no one gives me a proof that actually the data I get is correct. Because that's just a copy of what happened to the blockchain being sent to me. There is no incentive, there's no protection that the server I'm asking to please tell me what happened in that like block of the blockchain gives me the right data. In order to for me to be able to actually truly verify this and stuff, I would need to run my own node, which is really, really expensive and things like this. So this is then also the reason why Kyve evolved into something bigger. It's like, hey, we need to build tools and ways to access blockchain data, so we know that the data we now receive on a read perspective is correct, because we know the write stuff has happened this way, but now we need to find a way that the read stuff has also happened correctly this way. And then this is how, yeah, the whole Kyve story evolved. And what we do is we work with many, many blockchains out there. Like I would say most of the bigger ones too that you kind of know. And we are exactly this. We are like their data foundation layer. We only store the raw data from a blockchain. We are not like a high level, we provide you some kind of insight service, but what we provide them is a secure archive of their data that is then used by tools like, for example, like marketing analytics, financial analytics, that then use our data because they know that they can trust it, so to say, and they know it's not been tampered with. There is no error in this data, without them basically having to run their own infrastructure to check for this. And yeah, this is like what the whole idea of Kyve is. Basically, put it in really, really quick words. It's like on one side we archive data, and on the other side we have tools then for people to retrieve it, transform it, and sell it back basically to a customer.
So you said you were working with Polkadot initially, and you're working, I know Cosmos is a big partner for you guys
Yes.
now. Why do they need the backup with the Kyve network? Why isn't where it is initially enough?
Yes, because basically a node on a blockchain network only receives rewards for producing new data, right? Every time a new block is produced, the nodes in the network receive a reward. None of the nodes are actually rewarded for keeping the data. It's kind of funny to think about this because no one is actually providing an incentive to do it, which leads to the problem that if I want to be more profitable as a node, I can just delete all the old data. There is no need for me to keep it around, right?
Mm.
Because I only get money for producing new data. And this is really where Kyve comes in by providing this incentive for basically the nodes to offload the data to us. And then we paying basically people in a different way to store that data. And many projects, they host something that's called an archival node. This is one node that has all the data and will not delete it. But there is, again, no incentive. The teams pay for it just with cash, basically. You don't get rewards
Mhm.
for it. It's really, really expensive. And then also the teams that are providing it are just doing it because it's a public good. Like they can't monetize it either. And so it's just, yeah, it just doesn't make basically any economic sense for them to do it. And yeah, when we talk about the blockchain, it's only just the latest moment in time that is secure. Everything that happened in the past, we have to replay to figure out what really happened. And that's why we need something like Kyve in order to prevent that.
That makes sense. So, is the data that you are, s preserving, is it being stored on Arweave or by the Kyve network or both? Like, what is happening there?
Yes, it is stored on Arweave, so all of our data lives on Arweave. What
Okay.
we store with Kyve is we store the proof that this data on Arweave has been validated by us. Because it
Aha.
could be that someone else goes ahead and just uploads Poker.block5 and says, yeah, this is Poker.block5, but then no one knows if that's actually true or not. And so what we do on our chain is we store the proof and we say, yes, this piece on Arweave is actually Poker.block number 5.
Okay, that makes sense. So the validation, that was a big question that I had when I was sort of like preparing for this interview. You guys say that Kyve determines that the data is valid before archiving, and that kind of goes back to that truth conversation that we're having. Like, what does it mean to determine that the data is valid?
Yes. There is, first of all, there is no general answer to this. So it's very context specific, might be very project
Okay.
specific to say this piece of data is valid or not. With blockchain data, it's pretty easy. We can say, hey, does my local copy of the data equal the same that I get from someone else, for example, right? Just does data A equal data B? That is one way of checking that this is true. If we say Kyve might archive, and we totally can, a price feed, for example, of like, let's say, the Bitcoin price from Coinbase, Binance, and I don't know, some other exchange, then what could be true in terms of like this price is valid would be if the difference of two prices is not more than X or Y, basically.
Okay,
So it's
that's
very
kind of what I guessed. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
exactly. And so Kyve works very generically. The only thing our chain does is our validators, they vote on every piece of data and say, I think this is valid, I think this is invalid. If the majority votes that the data is valid, our blockchain keeps the record and says this is a valid Polkadot block number 5. If it isn't valid, the person that uploaded the data receives a slash, so gets punished for uploading wrong data. And our blockchain doesn't keep block number 5 of Polkadot, and the network tries again for the same block. Basically, this goes on and on and on until we would find a valid block number 5 of Polkadot that the network agrees on is correct in that sentence that the data that they locally have is the same as what they get from a different blockchain.
That makes sense. So, do you only work with blockchain networks, or are you also archiving, let's say, I don't know, like API results?
Yeah, so primarily we work only with blockchain data right now because this is where we found our market to fit best. We do
Hmm.
have many requests here and there to also archive like pricing stuff is a big question, big demand basically, and like how can we preserve pricing data because it's also kind of a public good, right? And things like this, but our primary focus right now is blockchain data, especially in the Cosmos space. You briefly mentioned this, but we also do work with other blockchains outside of the Cosmos space.
Okay, cool. Do you guys have like competitors that are kind of doing the same thing that you're doing or similar things to you?
Yeah, there aren't. This is an interesting thing, actually. There still aren't many direct competitors basically to what we do. I think because we were very unique in that sense that we actually came out of the Arweave space, and Arweave to me always feels like a very underrated ecosystem. I think now with
Hmm.
like the pushes they do and like the AO things they do, now it's getting actually the recognition that it needed. But storing data on a blockchain is always the biggest problem. Like it's so expensive to store data on Ethereum. It's actually impossible from a pricing perspective to do it. So I think we got lucky that we were really early to market with our solution and are now able to do it. The DA, the data availability solutions, they go in that direction. For people that maybe don't know what data availability is, it's like you take data from a blockchain and store it temporarily. So it's at least available for 30 days. It's like what
Mm.
Celestia, for example, is doing. But there, then the question is, well, what happens after 30 days? It's like a
Mhm.
little better, but not the real solution. And so I think we really got lucky that we were early out of the Arweave space and actually got this opportunity. Me, myself, without that bounty, I would probably never had the idea or even be aware that this is a problem for networks to store their data because we're so used to using explorers and the data is just there, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, you actually, if you are deaf in the space, you also notice there are very easy questions you can't answer. For example, we have a team, they're just building out a new blockchain, and they want to know how many average transactions do we have per block. Sounds like that's something you would know right away.
Mhm.
You don't. You don't. Because how would you know, right? If you go to like a blockchain explorer, yeah, you can see all the individual transactions, but an explorer doesn't offer a feature for developers that say, hey, give me all the average values. And especially with like blockchain nodes deleting the data and only keeping, let's say, the last 5 days or something like this, I might can write a program that gets it for me reliable for the last 5 days. But what happened 7, 8, 9, 10 days ago, I don't know. So this is like already something where basically we need solutions like Kyve, like data availability, data storage solutions to even answer those simple questions, right? And this is like a really simple question for like a new network. They want to know how much traction do we have, and there is no way for them to find out. And this is for me also like very eye opening. Like, oh my god, like that's actually a problem, right? So this is
Mhm.
I think also cool. Like I'm also learning a lot like what challenges the other networks are facing. We do see a lot also of like data challenges other networks have in terms of scalability and stuff, and trying to help them out there. So a very interesting angle, so to say, tackling that thing.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about the importance of storing historical data. You just brought up like the issue of like traction. That's an important one. But what other kinds of issues do you see or do you think that are particularly interesting?
A big topic. It's a boring one, but it is a very painful one. Is tax reporting. We actually have
Mhm.
chains partners we work with that 2 3 years ago were worth billions of dollars, and the data is gone, and they have to report their taxes. And they're sitting there and they're coming to us and be like, hey, Kyve team, so we need to file our taxes, but we don't have the data. Can you please find us a way that we can get our data back? Because of course, right,
Wow.
in the moment you're so like used to growth, and you're like, okay, let's move fast, right? Like we need to resolve that. And then yeah, 2 years later, you're like, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
We should have probably looked into a solution. And this actually is something that happens a lot. Also, I mean, Solana is very famous. Solana has lost blocks. Like it's not something like, of course, only developers know. But like, if you go to like Solana, you want to sync your node, there are like 5, 6, 7 blocks you have to manually insert because the blockchain itself doesn't have them anymore.
Wow.
And this is of course like this is due to this, and then there are also like data design problems, especially we see this on those high frequency chains.
Mm.
Let's say there are chains that produce a new block every 400 milliseconds,
That's
and
very fast.
that's very fast, right?
Yeah.
So but now it gets problematic because people can stake their tokens, and every time a block gets produced, you receive a reward because you staked your tokens. What the blockchain does is actually throws three different events. It says, hey, we have sent tokens to this address. This address has received tokens. And by the way, this was a delegation. So there's three events for one person that delegated a token. Now they have like, let's say 10,000 delegators. That's 30,000 events every 400 milliseconds. So that's 90,000 events every second, and that's basically impossible to manage
Mhm.
because like the database you would need to like get all the insights and do reportings and stuff like this, it's actually not worth it because the query costs to like understand that data is so expensive that no one is able to pay it. So we also see like this is what I kind of meant with like scalability problems, where we talk to chains, and I mean those chains are live for 2 3 4 years. It just wasn't relevant for them because now they are like, at a point where there's so much data that they don't know how to handle it. And then it gets really complicated because that's also the downside of a blockchain. Because it's immutable, the moment something has been produced, you cannot change it anymore. It has happened, and you somehow have to deal with it. And yeah, that's very interesting things we do see also from teams that are in the space longer. It's kind of like those scalability problems. And then the new chains like, hey, there should be easy answers to those presumably easy questions. How can we get them? And I think this is where we like fill the gap basically for them.
That definitely makes sense. Okay, wow. Um, are there use cases maybe that people aren't thinking about yet, or maybe even aren't exploring yet, but that you dream about, you're excited about beyond backing up like blockchains and oracles?
Yeah, yes, for me, actually, what I'm super excited about are those marketing and product questions, right? Especially when we want to talk about, hey, we need adoption for crypto. I need to
Mhm.
understand my users. And in order to understand my users, I need to understand the data that they are producing. Most common, most normal thing in Web 2, right? If I have an online store, I can measure everything from how well
Mhm.
my ads are performing, website clicks, checkouts, purchases, retarget campaigns, and probably when we talk about this podcast on a brand, I will get an ad for this on social media, right? Like Web 2 is covered. In Web 3, we don't have any of this because the data infrastructure isn't there. And so actually for me, building this data infrastructure is super, super exciting because it will just provide a much better user experience for users because we can actually finally understand user behavior, learn from user behavior, and improve the apps accordingly and know what they want and what they need. This is really cool. And then, of course, actually, if you also think about it, a user is even more transparent on a blockchain because I can see all the transactions the user has done across all the apps they use. So also there, in terms of like, how can I optimize my marketing? How can I optimize my product is very, very interesting for me personally, understanding yeah, all of those little nuances, basically.
That's super interesting because you said your background in Web 2 was in ad tech, right? And so, like, that makes sense that those would connect, and also that analytics is a massive problem in Web 3. We just really don't have them. Um, but of course, that brings up the question of privacy and data ownership, because most people would say, well, part of the Web 3 movement means that the user owns their data. So would that work? How would you guys deal with that? Would that be something that Hive could deal with, or is it more just like for things that you're comfortable being in public?
I think this is an visibility problem in Web3 because for me, this term, like you own your data,
Mhm.
for me, it's like a big, big, big buzzword slash marketing phrase because
Mm.
it's actually the complete opposite. Because you don't own anything. If I upload a file to my Google Drive, I can delete it, I can update it, I can rename it. I actually have, I would personally say, a little bit more ownership over this. On the blockchain, the moment I post it, it's owned by the public, it's owned by the chain. They can control what to do with it, right? If the validators of a network decide to create a fork and remove my transaction, they can do it. That is totally valid, right? So for me, it's like this data ownership thing is very interesting because yes, to some extent I have the control, I have permissionless freedom to do what I want. Ownership, I think, is just a way of how you define it. It's basically, I mean, if I'm only creating public goods, that's great, but I always have to be aware that everything I do is there forever, like forever ever. It's like imagine the internet but you couldn't delete anything, and I'm very happy I can delete things that a younger me did on the internet from years ago, right? And
Right.
so I think this is also something where we need to get better at educating people in the space, that they have to be aware that we can track everything and people will track everything because it is valuable, right? I know every single transaction a user has done on our network, right? And it's okay because I don't know the user directly, but I can understand it, right? And then it gets even tricky because we say, hey, we want to do onboarding easy. I see a lot of wallets now introducing the feature sign up with your email address. Well,
Mhm.
that is a centralized company. They know your email address, they know your on chain address, and wallets, they usually don't have a steady income of revenue. So for them, it's of course very lucrative to be like, hey, we're sitting on this whole bunch of user data. And it's actually pretty crazy how transparent a user suddenly gets because on the blockchain, I basically know the net worth of a user on the chain. I know exactly the balance at any point in time. I know exactly how they have used the Web3, how they might have been affected from certain things, and suddenly I know their email address. And nowadays, I mean, if you've been in Web 2 with an email address, I can get to anything. I can show you personalized ads. I can do anything from there on, right?
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
this is like the very anchor point where it gets dangerous. It's the same for me with like exchanges, like with the KYC requirement. They also know my address, so they know who I am. And from that moment on, I'm not anonymous anymore on Web3 for them, right? For
Mhm.
myself, I might be. And so I think we just have to be really, really careful that we educate the people correctly and be like, be aware that what you do in Web3, your trace does not get deleted in that sense, right? Like we can always reconstruct what someone has done. And it might be okay now, it might be okay for like 5 years, but who knows how you think back like 6, 7, 8 years ago or something like that. That's when it gets really
Okay.
interesting.
Okay, that's kind of a hot take, I have to
Yeah,
say. I mean, yeah.
it is.
Um, I think that the issue of privacy is something we don't yet see clearly because there's a lot of experimentation happening and figuring out um where the processing happens, where the information, is it client side? Is it server side? Is it happening in the world computer or the Arweave computer or whatever it might be? Is all things that we still need to figure out and that we definitely don't understand the consequences of which choices we make fully. Because I think, as we started at the beginning of the conversation, that issue of usability, of it being really accessible, is important and something that if we don't get right, we won't succeed. But at the same time, as you're bringing up with this wallet example, if we make it so easy, that's not the right way to explain it, but if we make it so easy that it then becomes this sort of vector for attack.
Yeah.
We also get it wrong, and so then that has, like, all of these unintended consequences that are, like, very, very dangerous, but that's actually a really good segue into, I wanted to learn more about the business model of Kyve, and you mentioned, like, wallets have a hard time having a business model. I think that was something that kind of, like, surprised people in the early days, but that was something that I saw really early on, just, like, if you can, copy something and make it for free, why would somebody, like there's some issues around that. So what is your business model? Tell us how the incentives work for the Kyve network.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very Web3 native. It's very straightforward. Basically, the way it works is the projects we work with, they pay for every piece of data Kyve uploads. Um, and so right now they pay in Kyve tokens, which means that every time a piece of data gets uploaded, the people that have been part of that uploading process, so the validators, receive this as a reward and they then pay it out to their stakers. So it's like a normal proof of stake system. You stake your Kyve tokens, the other projects, they purchase them and they pay for their storage, and this is it. Actually, perfect timing for this podcast because we are having a big update coming out in next week or so. I think depends when you guys listen to the podcast. It's now that because we are our own L1, we can actually now take any token from our partners. So basically, they don't need to purchase Kyve tokens anymore. They can actually pay in their native currency, which is really cool, right? So let's say we work
That's
with
really cool.
Celestia, then the team can just pay in TIA tokens, and our validators they get then the TIA token as a reward. And we were like, okay, cool, but we can actually take this a step further, which is that we come up with a cool system, which is that we are running a validator on the partners network. Why are we doing it? First of all, because we generate rewards from that partner, basically. And this is cool because we can use those as payment for the data. And the other thing is that the other chain will always produce data as long as it's running. And as long as the chain is running, our validator is running. So as long as the chain is running and needs data to be stored, we are already generating basically rewards for this. And so this is like a big initiative we're rolling out with all of our partners right now, where we with the Kai Foundation are running validators in the other networks, and we're taking those rewards directly and paying for basically the users that are uploading and validating the data. And this is how we create a business model around the data.
Super interesting. I like that a lot. Now, I believe you're also backing all of that data up into Arweave, you said, right?
Yes.
So is the cost of putting that into Arweave sort of baked into that somewhere along the way?
Exactly. This is already basically baked into this. The way it works is our validators, when they upload the data to Arweave, right now they pay in R tokens. And then we have a conversion rate. And then when they have uploaded valid data, they get what they spent in R tokens with a little premium on top of it paid out, plus extra money that the funder puts up and says, hey, I pay 10 Kyve tokens every time data is uploaded. Then they get this data and do it. So it's already baked in that. And we're right now also working on a solution where they can pay directly in Kyve tokens, so don't even have to go through the route of having basically to pay Arweave with R, but they can pay Arweave with Kyve tokens. That's also something really cool, just to make also the user experience again, right, for those guys easier.
Yeah, that's really cool. Have you had any sort of issues or friction around the cost of storing data in Arweave? Sometimes I've heard people complain that it's expensive.
Yes, it is definitely a valid concern. Also, in general, blockchain is very expensive, right?
Mm,
I don't
mhm.
know many or maybe any blockchain that is in theory actually running net positive based on just the transaction fees they make, right? This is kind of not many chains have achieved that, and I think Arweave is actually with like a valid model for the payment is there, and it's fine, right? You create a valid incentive. Maybe for the people that don't know how the Arweave payment works, I can also quickly explain it. It's basically Arweave says, hey, we're gonna basically guarantee you that we store the data for 200 years. So what they do is they calculate how much it would cost to pay that one piece of data for 200 years, and then they say, hey, pay this upfront, and we will pay the validators every year a little bit of that, a 200th of that amount, and so we ensure kind of like 200-year payment. It's like a very easy way maybe of breaking down, maybe a little bit too simplistic, but that's how it works under the hood. And so, yeah, it is definitely expensive, but it is a fair price for the permanent storage that you get. Because people also forget it's like when you have it stored on, let's say, just Amazon S3 or something like this, you have an accumulating cost, right? There I pay every
Absolutely.
year, and I'm also up to the fluctuations of whatever Amazon wants to charge me. If all of a sudden they want to charge me more, then I have to pay more, and then this basically gets into problems. So this is like the cool thing about Arweave. Yes, it is more expensive, but Arweave is also superb in kind of like the service they offer, as well as also the developer experience, which also matters a lot, right? Like it's okay to pay a little bit more, but have a great experience and it works. Than if you have a go to like a cheaper provider, but they're just it doesn't really work. So that's also I think a decision on our side.
What is it about Arweave that makes it such a great developer experience?
Hmm. It's just that you can use it so easily. There's zero barrier to get started, which is really cool. And also what I loved in the beginning because I had no idea about crypto, and then
Mhm.
started out in Aviv, and it was familiar because they used JavaScript. You didn't have to learn Solidity, which is a crypto only language. So I could
Mhm.
just basically use like work in my developer tools that I loved. Right? They really put a lot of effort into that, which is really cool. And then the team also is and was very accessible. So very short lines of communication. I could do direct impact on things. I was an early contributor there, which was really cool for me, and kind of like also hope at least I shaped it a little bit with the ideas that I and contributions that I had there. And it's just what I love about it. It's so easy to get started. It's straightforward. It's not complicated. And the Arweave team did a really, really, really good job providing this developer experience. That's basically what they really focused on.
Yeah, I agree. I just love to hear from you. That's it's a great testament to Arweave for sure. Um, so because you have so much experience, connecting to, let's say, different chains, you work with so many different partners. Um, do you think that there are, or have you identified any areas where we need to do more work to increase interoperability between these protocols?
Absolutely. I think it's definitely the way we use events. What are blockchain events? Blockchain events actually the only thing as a human I can really use. Because a transaction is pretty useless. If I say, hey, someone has done something from A to B, I need to get context what it was. Did they transfer tokens? Did they create a smart contract? Did they burn tokens? So the event is what gives the transaction context. And also, what many people maybe don't know is the events are actually not stored on the blockchain. Um, the events are just basically stored next to the blockchain, so to say. They're also not validated as part of the blockchain, which on one side can cause problems because when I want to read the events, it could be that they are not there. Then I'm missing context to a transaction and suddenly don't know what happened. But on those events, I would love to see a standard. I think crypto is very, very good at creating tons of different words for exactly the same thing. Um, and it would just make life a lot easier if we would all talk about the same thing, meaning the same thing, right? It's staking on Ethereum. On Cosmos, it's staking only when a node delegates, because that's what they call staking, to itself. Then it's called staking. If I am not running a node but giving tokens to someone, it's called delegation. It means the same thing, but it just makes it super complicated, even when I try to explain it to you. So I think like those kind of like standards and things would be really nice if that's maybe something we could also enforce maybe industry wide and just say, hey, like certain transfers, certain types of transactions have a certain standard. And then it makes it a lot easier on actually interoperability chain to chain because they actually understand each other easily, but also off chain, right? Again, accounting, I know it's super boring, but it's a super big use case for us. If there would actually be an underlying event standard coming from the blockchain to the accounting software, that would make stuff so much easier. And again, they also right grow adoption, maybe get more enterprise customers in because they don't have this like compliance sort of like, hey, we're dealing with a technology we have no clue with, right? Also a technology that is so permissionless that it is used for many shady things. It's just called what it is. But I think working with those standards and things is the right way. Like on-chain, I don't want to say regulation, sounds a little harsh, but like on-chain standards would
Mhm.
make the whole space more interoperable in itself. Yeah.
Mhm. I completely agree with you. I'm a huge fan of standards and how important that they are. And just to a fun story, since you kind of got into the space late, you might find this fun. There was a paper in 1956 that had
Mhm.
this diagram of a centralized network, decentralized network, and a distributed network. And if you look at this diagram, you would think that the decentralized network is like the hub and spoke shape. And well, that's how it shows it. And or do I have this backwards? I do. Okay. And then the decent what we would call decentralized today was called distributed. So when I was getting into the space in like 2014, 2015, this diagram was going around because people were trying to like wrestle with these words and what do we call it, and I think just because people like prefer how it sounds, decentralized caught on for how we talk about these networks, even though technically speaking, according to like academic papers, they are distributed. And so for a number of years, there was just like all this confusion. Are we making distributed networks? Are we making decentralized networks? Like it was so hard to even just like have a conversation.
Yeah.
So I completely agree. It's definitely a weakness in Web3 that we invent wild words and just all of these kind of marketing buzzwords that don't help us, and that we 100% need standards. And I think that that's just going to be one of those things that evolves over time, hopefully. I mean, it's going to have to for
Yeah.
interoperability to really work out in the end. And if there were some shortcuts for getting there, that would be really nice for all of us. um, so obviously, we both agree that interoperability will be a main driver for adoption of Web3 because it will be just sort of this necessary step technically for things to become easier to use. Do you see other kinds of things that are going to drive adoption of Web3? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think is gonna help us? Because right now
Yeah.
I feel like we're still just so early. I think a lot of us who have been in the space for a long time feel like or have felt at times like we are further along than we are, and then there's these moments where it's like, "Oh, no, actually, like, we still have a ways to go."
Yes. Actually, I'm putting up a hot take, but for me, it's regulations. But I'm not talking about like the US kind of regulations, right? Like I would really wish for regulations that actually allow projects to have a fair playground for all of them, right?
Mm,
Because I think this is really what we need, right? We need to be able to be in a safe environment where we know what is okay and what is not okay to do, because this then drives adoption. Because I know that like still many people even now associate like cryptocurrencies with scams, right? And
Totally, yeah.
why? Because even I in the space have seen trillions of scams in this space, right? Meme coins, all the pump and dump stuff, and so on, right? It's like really, yeah, it is still happening. Why? Because we don't have an enforcement in place that says, look, this is kind of not okay to do, right? Or okay, but this is in a different category, so to say, right? And this is really what I think we would need. Like we need interoperability on a tech side, and then good, healthy regulation on really like an operations side. Like we need to know like standards, also standards regulations for me is like one category. We need to know what we do, that it's okay that we do it. We also set our boundaries. There will be people breaking the boundaries. They always do, but at least like, hey, this is okay, this is not okay. That also will make other people feel more comfortable getting in the space, right? And we see, I mean,
100%.
yeah, absolutely. So we're based in Europe. We have the MiCA regulations coming up, and
Mhm,
it already feels like they like almost over regulated again. Right? It's going to be
mhm.
really hard. I'm like, guys, come on, like talk to the projects, find out what they need, and then regulate the necessary things. But you don't need to over regulate things because that also slows down adoption so much. So like, how can we like stay innovative but be in a safe environment, and especially create a safe environment for retail, like non-technical people coming in the space that really don't know what they do.
Mhm.
Sadly, like I have a couple of like friends I know that like I said, oh my god, do you know this cryptocurrency and stuff? I'm like, nah, I've never heard of it. Where have you seen from? Oh, I've seen like from this and this guy. You look at it and you just already know it's like the typical Ponzi token, and it's like, because but why? I mean, it's not because it's so technical for them, so hard to get in. They cannot decide what's true and what's like legit, what's like maybe not legit in that sense. And so this is, I think, really what we as an industry also have to work on, maybe being more proactive on our side, being like, look, we want those standards, yes, we want regulations, but please work with us, work together, and let's figure out a way how we can make it happen from both sides. I think that would be really great.
I think that's really well said. I think regulation is absolutely one of the things that is holding back, Main Street, if you want to call it that, like that mainstream, just normal user who uses Web 2, who wants to maybe start using some of these tools and have some of these new, things that Web3 can unlock, but they're scared, right? Like there's so much, whether it's intentional scams of people actually trying to steal from you, or it's unintentional. I don't want to call them scams. They're people who maybe just didn't even fully understand what they were doing when they started building a project and kind of unintentionally scam people, or there's just this confusing regulatory landscape. And like you
Yeah.
said, we really need that. It's a very delicate balance between creating something that has the structure that helps to um, make it a fair marketplace, without having such onerous regulation as to hinder the industry from being able to create new innovation, from being able to offer new things. And like you said, you called it Mika, I call it Micah. Either way, MICA is this new regulation in the EU that is a lot of people were really excited about it first because at least something was happening. It was like, oh, thank goodness. Like, we're going to have some clear regulatory guardrails. But then when we got into some more of the details about it, it was like, oh,
Mm.
maybe this is going to actually like hurt startups from being able to, because the compliance is so burdensome. And we're looking at that now in the US here. Like, how are we going to get that right? And it's something that we're doing a lot of work on too, to just help provide education around these issues, especially when it comes to projects in our space. Because I'm sure you've heard the term DPIN has been now assigned to
Absolutely.
like the category that we work in, right? So decentralized physical infrastructure networks are these, infrastructure that is providing like how we interact on the web. It's totally different than financial services, and sometimes then needs to be regulated differently as well. And so we're just trying to be a voice for that and try to help, make sure that whatever happens in a way that is supportive of the industry. Well, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience today before we wrap up here? This has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, if I would say anything, would be exactly that. It was a great conversation. It was really amazing. really happy I could express my thoughts here, and it was very cool topics we talked about. It was very, very nice. Not the usual like, hey, what's just going on in your network? Like really broad questions. I'm a big fan of this, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I have one final question for you. It's the name of our podcast. What kind of internet do you want?
I want an internet that is safe to use for non-technical users, easy to use for non-technical users, and still gives those people freedom and can do what they want, right? Ownership, now I'm using it as well, right? Off data, but really being able to select it, but with the underlying infrastructure allowing for this, right? I think this is where I'm like, I want to have a space where, yeah, if I want to get targeted ads, I can opt in for this. But if I opt out, I actually really want to opt out, right? And there should be a technical barrier that, like, really says I'm opted out. And so I think this is kind of like the space where we want to go. And I think it's really exciting what is happening. Like I think I said it very in the beginning, like this blockchain on one side and then AI on the other side. I think it was just like a very cool complementary contrast in a way, and it's very much needed. I'm really excited to see like this space evolving because I see lots of like the future in AI and the applications it has to our like daily life because it's like super powerful. But we need to also make sure that this doesn't go off the rails basically and turns into a little bit of this dystopian world. And I actually think blockchain is a very strong pillar for this, and this is how I would love to see the web kind of like evolving, like more interconnected, safe to use and free to use.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. I maybe we can get into that next time because I completely agree. Blockchain and AI need each other for us to have the web we all want. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone out there. Have a great day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.